It started with pressure. Heavy pressure. A pressure that didn't come from the streets. It came from the top. Somewhere behind closed doors, a decision was made: we must stop this protest. The message was clear. The target was clearer. Sowore, Nigeria's Inspector General of Police, Nnamdi Kanu, reportedly sent police lawyers into action. Not to fight crime. Not to protect citizens. But to stop a protest. A peaceful protest calling for one thing: the freedom of Nnamdi Kanu. They wanted the court to silence the people before they could even speak. They wanted a judge's pen to replace the crowd's voice. But what they didn't expect was resistance. The planned Free Nnamdi Kanu Now protest was not just another gathering. It was a cry that had been building up for years. From the southeast to the heart of Abuja, people were ready to march, peacefully, boldly, and fearlessly. And that frightened the powerful. Because when people unite around truth, power begins to tremble. When injustice is called by its name, fear begins to change sides. So the system made its move, fast, quiet, and legal. They didn't send armed men into the streets. They sent lawyers into the courtroom. They wanted a piece of paper, a court order, that would stop everything before it began. That's how deep the fear ran. A fear of citizens gathering. A fear of voices shouting, enough. A fear of a protest that could shake the image of calm around Aso Rock Villa. And at the center of it all, Sowore. Activist. Journalist. Fighter. A man who has been through it all: detention, threats, and endless court cases. But still standing. Still speaking. Still pushing. He became their focus once again. And this time, the mission was simple: stop him, stop the movement. The police legal team prepared their papers. Their argument was to halt the Free Nnamdi Kanu Now protest scheduled for Abuja. They claimed it could cause unrest. They claimed it was unsafe. They claimed it was unlawful. But the truth? They were not protecting peace. They were protecting power. In moments like this, Nigeria always feels like a stage where the same story keeps replaying: citizens rising, the system resisting, and justice standing at a crossroads. But this time, something felt different. Something heavier. Because this wasn't just about politics. It was about freedom, the freedom of one man, and the voice of millions who see themselves in his struggle. The lawyers went to court. They wanted a quick decision, what's called an ex parte motion. A one-sided request where only their voices are heard. No opposition. No defense. No balance. Their goal was simple: stop the protest before Sowore could even respond. A legal ambush. An attempt to silence the movement before the drums could start beating. But even outside the courtroom, word began to spread. People were watching. Tension was rising. Social spaces were buzzing. Will they really stop it? Some asked. Will the court bow? Others wondered. And through it all, one thing stayed the same: Sowore's tone. Defiant. Calm. Unshaken. He didn't hide. He didn't back away. He spoke openly, calling the attempt what it was: a move to silence the truth. He reminded everyone that freedom of expression is not a crime. That peaceful protest is not rebellion. That speaking up for justice is not treason. Every word echoed louder than before, reaching those who had already decided to march. Those who had made up their minds that October 20th would not just be a date, it would be a message. A message that fear no longer rules. A message that silence no longer wins. As the case reached the Federal High Court in Abuja, everything hung in the balance. Would the system get its wish? Would the people's protest die in paperwork? The tension was almost tangible. You could feel it in conversations. You could sense it in the headlines. One decision, that's all it would take to determine whether Nigerians could still speak freely in their own country. But beneath the anxiety, something powerful was forming: resistance. People were watching closely. They were ready to speak louder if anyone tried to shut them down. And as all eyes turned to the court, one thing became clear: the people were not backing down. Not this time. Not when the cause was justice. Not when one man's freedom symbolized so many others. They had waited too long. Watched too much. Felt too much pain. This protest had already become bigger than Nnamdi Kanu himself. It had become a test of conscience for the nation. And whether the system liked it or not, the voice of the people was already awake. And no courtroom could silence that. The court was silent. But that silence was heavy, the kind that holds fear, tension, and expectation all at once. On one side, the police lawyers. On the other side, the spirit of protest waiting outside the courtroom walls. And in the middle, Justice Umar of the Federal High Court, Abuja. The moment had arrived. The system had played its card. They wanted the judge to stop the people before the people could speak. They wanted him to silence Sowore'S and crush the Free Nnamdi Kanu Now protest before it could take its first breath. But this time, the story took a turn no one saw coming. The police lawyers stood up first. They spoke with confidence, presenting their papers, citing sections, codes, and laws. They made it sound official, heavy, unquestionable. They painted the protest as dangerous, unnecessary, and capable of creating chaos. They said it was safer for everyone if it never happened. But beneath their calm words was one simple message: don't let them speak. For a while, the courtroom stayed quiet. The air was thick. Everyone waited for the judge's next words. Would he agree with the police? Would he sign the order and shut it all down? But Justice Umar leaned back. He studied the papers carefully. And then, quietly but firmly, he refused. He refused to grant the ex-party motion. He refused to silence anyone behind closed doors. He refused to let the system use the court as a weapon against the people. In that moment, something powerful happened. Justice stood taller than fear. The judge looked at the police lawyers and gave a simple instruction: serve Sowore'S. Let him be heard. Then we'll return for a proper hearing. Those words echoed beyond the courtroom. They carried weight. They carried meaning. They told a nation that silence would not be bought that easily. For once, the voice of authority did not side with power. It sided with fairness. And in that small act of courage, hope found space to breathe again. Outside, the news began to spread fast. The police had failed to get what they wanted. The protest was still alive. And Sowore'S movement, #Free Nnamdi Kanu Now, was gaining momentum. To the system, it was a setback. To the people, it was a spark. Because if the court refused to silence them, then maybe, just maybe, they still had a fighting chance. In moments like this, one thing always becomes clear: every government fears the power of a united voice. Not because of violence. Not because of numbers. But because truth, once spoken, cannot be undone. And Sowore'S knew that. He had seen this play before. He knew how power reacts when it feels challenged. But this time, he also knew he wasn't standing alone. The people had already chosen their side. They were ready to march, not for chaos, but for justice. They were ready to show the world that peaceful protest is not a crime, it's a right. Inside the system, panic quietly brewed. They had tried the court. They had tried intimidation. Nothing was working. The protest was moving closer. The voices were getting louder. And deep down, the question began to haunt those in power: what happens when thousands of Nigerians gather peacefully in the capital to demand justice? The government didn't want to find out. But now, they had no legal cover to stop it. The judge had spoken. The case was adjourned. The order denied. The movement, alive. For the first time in a long while, justice didn't bend. And that scared the powerful even more. Meanwhile, among ordinary people, the story was spreading. In markets. On the streets. In taxis and online spaces. Everyone was talking about the court's decision. It gave them courage. It gave them a reason to believe that Nigeria was still capable of doing the right thing, even if just for one moment. Because when justice speaks truth to power, it doesn't just protect one person. It protects everyone. And so, as the sun set that day, something began to shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. The people were no longer waiting for permission to be free. They were preparing to take their freedom to the streets, peacefully, boldly, and legally. The protest would go on. The message would be heard. And the court's refusal to silence the people would stand as a reminder that no matter how hard they try, you cannot lock up the truth forever. The news spread like wildfire. Across phones. Across cities. Across hearts. The court had refused to stop the protest. And just like that, hope came alive again. But with that hope came tension, thick, electric, and unshakable. Because now, nothing stood between the people and the streets. Nothing stood between the voice of freedom and the seat of power. Abuja was about to witness something historic. The Free Nnamdi Kanu Now protest was set to happen right at the doorstep of Aso Rock Villa. For the government, it was more than just a protest. It was a direct challenge. A reminder that the people were watching, speaking, and refusing to be silenced. Everywhere, conversations grew louder. Some asked, will the police allow it? Others whispered, will they fight back? But no one was asking if the protest would hold. That part was already decided. It was going to happen. Come what may. Sowore made it clear the people had a constitutional right to speak. To march peacefully. To demand justice without fear. He spoke with the kind of calm that comes only from conviction. The kind that shakes the ground without shouting. He said, we will not be afraid to stand for what is right. We will not be silent while injustice continues. Those words echoed. Not in noise, but in courage. Because every person who heard them felt something stir inside. This was no longer about one man behind bars. It was about every Nigerian who had ever felt unheard. It was about the promise of freedom and the pain of waiting too long for it. The protest was no longer just an event. It had become a symbol. A heartbeat. A declaration. And as October 20th approached, the atmosphere in Abuja began to shift. More security. More patrols. More whispers. But also, more determination. More unity. More courage. From students to traders, from activists to everyday citizens, the call had gone out. And the answer was the same, we will be there. The streets were no longer silent. The fear that once kept people apart was slowly breaking. Because when people realize their voice matters, fear begins to lose its power. The movement had crossed a line that power could not control, the line of truth. And once truth moves, no wall can hold it back. But everyone knew the risks. Everyone understood the dangers. They knew how quickly things could turn tense. Yet they also knew silence was no longer an option. Sowore'S courage had lit a fire. And that fire was spreading, not through violence, but through purpose. The kind of purpose that keeps nations alive when everything else feels broken. Aso Rock might still try to shut it down. But the message had already escaped. It was already in the air. Already in the hearts of millions. This protest wasn't just for Nnamdi Kanu. It was for justice. For fairness. For every voice that had been ignored or crushed. And deep down, everyone knew October 20th would not just be another day. It would be a test. A test of power. A test of freedom. A test of Nigeria's conscience. Would the people be allowed to speak peacefully? Would the government listen instead of suppress? Would the law stand with truth, or bend once again to power? These were the questions hanging in the air. Questions that would only be answered when the first chant rose in the streets of Abuja. Because when people step out with courage, no force can truly stop them. They may face walls. They may face fear. But history has always shown, truth always finds its way through. And now, as the day draws near, all eyes turn to Abuja. The world is watching. Nigeria is waiting. And the people are ready. Ready to march. Ready to speak. Ready to remind those in power that freedom is not a favor. It is a right.